The year was 1995. We were in a gangster's paradise with Coolio. Movies like Toy Story and Batman Forever were #1 at the box office. And we were hitting that digital age with things like Windows 95 coming out. eBay was introduced. Amazon sold its first book. I remember a time when Amazon was a book retailer. That's all they had. Well, fortunately, 1995 also had a ton of great Super Nintendo games, and we're going to cover a lot of them in this video. So if you were playing Super Nintendo back in 1995 like this guy, here are the games you were playing back then. Yeah, the best and the worst, you know. Speaking of books, did you know that I wrote a book about breakfast cereal of the 80s and 90s? Yeah. I also sell my oddly specific air fresheners like this one here that smells like an arcade. It's like menthol cigarettes, wood paneling, used gum, and spilt Coke. And because of my love for Star Tropics, we have Star Tropical. It's like pina colada and jungle. I also sell my homebrews on there. RateGames.com. You can check out a link in the description below. Thank you for watching and thank you for your support. Let's start off with a great one. Mega Man X2. Oh my god, the sequel to Mega Man. Can you believe it? Oh, it was the sequel to Mega Man X, I suppose. So we already had Mega Man X, the first one, and now we have Mega Man X2. And it's more Mega Man X with the robotic bosses that aren't just like Metal Man, Snake Man. It's like animals, like robotic animals. That's kind of fun. I do like the Mega Man X series. I still prefer the original Mega Man series more, but it's cool to see Mega Man X2. And then they started the Capcom collaboration crossover. It's just so popular with the Street Fighter 2 that they even included, you can unlock the Haruken, you can unlock the fireball, the Ryukin fireball thingy that they do. It's not really a fireball, I guess. I mean, they call it a fireball, but you know what I mean? You can do that. You can do the Hadouken in Mega Man X2. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Pac in Time was interesting because Pac-Man was still around, and now let's put Pac-Man in as a cartoony action platformer, kind of. Well, you can pick up items that you can use along the way too, and you're still gobbling dots or, you know, whatever those things are called. But it's like Pac-Man as a platformer, and I just thought it was an interesting idea. But yeah, Pac in Time, why not? The Ignition Factor came out. I was very excited for this. Not like super excited, but we didn't really have a whole lot of games based on firefighters back then. And I don't know why not, because firefighters are generally known as being these great heroes. So why wouldn't they have more games based on firefighting? It's interesting. There's been a few, not many though, when you think about it. And Ignition Factor is a firefighting game where you're going inside buildings and putting out fires, putting out, you know, traditional fires and electrical fires, rescuing the people. It was actually a pretty cool game. Brandish was interesting enough. It was from Koei, and anytime I saw the word Koei, I was like, oh, then it's gonna be one of those weird strategy games that like forces you to use your brain and stuff like that too. I don't want to use my brain when I'm playing a video game. I just want to play the game. Well, Brandish is a little bit more RPG-ish. Brandish is a little bit more Zelda-ish, where you're actually slashing your sword and stuff. But the weirdness when you're walking around these dungeons and when you turn left and right, your body doesn't just, you know, go left, go right. The entire screen rotates to face that direction. So you're always facing up. You're always facing in that direction. But when you turn left or right, the entire screen pivots and rotates, and that gets confusing. But it was kind of cool because by doing that, you can see what's on the walls, and then maybe there's a plaque on the wall that you wouldn't see at a certain angle, or a door that you didn't even know was there. So that was kind of cool. So I'll give it up for that, but I'll give it up for Koei, and I'll give it up for Brandish. Not the best, but it was an interesting thing to see. Kirby's Avalanche, a puzzle game with Kirby. It's Puyo. Call it whatever you want, it's always going to be Puyo. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine or whatever that was for the Genesis. It's Puyo Puyo, and Puyo Puyo's great. I liked it a lot, and it took me a while to realize that it wasn't just about clearing the little globules as soon as you can, which of course helps, but man, it's when you get those combos to make the other person fail. And that's so much about what Puyo is all about. Is less about you winning through strategy and more about you making your opponent lose on purpose. That's great. So right around the same time, we had Kirby's Dream Course, which is one of my absolute favorite Super Nintendo games, and one of my favorite Kirby games. Now, it's a Kirby side story, it's not a traditional Kirby game. It's more like a mini golf game, but you play as Kirby, and then your power-ups and items will help you sink yourself into these holes and stuff like that. I absolutely love this game. I still come back to it whenever I can. I play it like on flights through the Switch online service and all that. Love me some Kirby's Dream Course. I love it. I love it. Spider-Man came out from LJN. Now we had X-Men from Fox. And then a lot of people always talk about X-Men, the cartoon. Great. It's wonderful. It's one of the best, of course. But man, Spider-Man was so good. I loved me some Fox's Spider-Man. The cartoon was excellent. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And then the Super Nintendo game, it's fine. It's LJN. I know it's LJN. But LJN, when it hit Super Nintendo, I think was better than LJN NES, if that makes sense. Just because it says LJN, it still might be worth checking out. And I thought Spider-Man played pretty well. We had the Flintstones. There was a bit of a resurgence of the Flintstones. There was the live-action Flintstones movie, which is the one that this is based after, but also Flintstones were always in syndication. They were always in reruns. Whether you grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you probably saw the Flintstones on TV. When Cartoon Network first started, there was a whole lot of Flintstones on there. Flintstones and Jetsons, that's another story. But this Flintstones for the Super Nintendo was based more on the movie that came out that had John Goodman as Fred Flintstone, right? Rick Moranis was in there. It had Kyle MacLachlan from Yakima, Washington. Kyle MacLachlan was like the bad guy, which is kind of cool. And the game itself, I mean, it's from Ocean, which is not the greatest company ever, but it was still okay-ish. Top Gear 3000. Now, usually as games progress, when there's more and more sequels, they get better and better. Usually. Now, Top Gear 3000 took kind of a nosedive, in my opinion. Top Gear for Super Nintendo, excellent. Top Gear 2 came out. It's like, it was okay. I mean, I still prefer the first one, but the second one's fine. So now Top Gear 3000, when you jump the shark in video games, is when you take a game and put it into outer space. And although this game isn't quite outer space, it certainly has a futuristic theme to it. I hope you rented it. It's as if it was made by a completely different team. But Top Gear 3000, well, it came out in 1995. I at least wanted to plug it because it does exist. And maybe you love it. I don't know. True Lies, another LJN game. This one was based on the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this one, never mind that LJN logo, True Lies, I'm here to tell you, is an amazing game. It's super, super great. It's super, super fun. That kind of overhead, you're shooting people, you're dodging out of the way. Check out True Lies for the Super Nintendo. It's pretty cool, and you wouldn't even know it, but it's from LJN, believe it or not. Fatal Fury Special came around that time too. Probably my favorite version of Fatal Fury, and I'm a big fan of the Fatal Fury series as it is. 2D, that Neo Geo, SNK, one-on-one fighting game, Terry Bogard and all that. But it has that second layer. It has that, like, you can, like, fight each other, and then you can also, like, bounce back and forth, so you're, like, you know, and with other attacks and stuff like that, too. I just thought it was pretty cool. And it's cool to see that in 1995 we were still getting, like, it's like, well, I don't have a Neo Geo. I can't afford a Neo Geo. However, I'll play the Super Nintendo port. Yeah, it won't be Neo Geo quality, but it's good enough for me. Stargate was such a huge thing. The movie, loved the movie. It was the movie that I think most people saw from that time. That was so cool. And they made the Super Nintendo game based on Stargate. Now, Stargate has since evolved into its own thing. Was there a cartoon series? I don't remember. But there was, like, you know, the TV series and the toy line and all these other things. And I'm surprised they haven't rebooted Stargate yet. Maybe they have. I just didn't know it yet. But they made a video game. They made it for the Super Nintendo. At first, when I heard it was coming out, I was like, you're playing as the weird scientist guy? The one guy who solved no, you're playing as, like, the army guy. Like, it's a run and gun. It's a run and gun game, but it's Stargate. That's actually kind of fun. The release date says June 5th of 1995. This is the day that we got Earthbound. And I remember seeing Earthbound for rent and being, oh, it's like an RPG. I mean, it is an RPG, but it's like an RPG based in modern time. Because so many RPGs before this were like fantasy, mythical, medieval, whatever, unicorns and dragons. And this one has like, you know, you're in a city, and instead of having like healing potions, you have like cheeseburgers. I was like, that's a really cool idea. Now, I didn't know that this was the sequel to a game that came out for the Famicom in Japan. I just thought it looked cool. And it plays like a turn-based RPG. Not my favorite, but I give them a chance, and they always have the best music, especially on the Super Nintendo. I thought it worked out pretty well. Hagaday also came out. Have you actually looked at Hagaday yet? I'm sure you've heard about it. If you're a collector and you're collecting games, you've probably heard about Hagaday because of the value. But have you actually played it? It's insanely good. It's like an action game. It's like a run and gun, but there's so many actions you can do in this game. So if you haven't checked it out yet, it doesn't matter. You don't have to buy the card. Emulation is your friend. Trust me. There's 1,000 ways to play these games. Check out Hagaday, even for a moment, and you'll be like, oh, okay, I get it now. We get Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. Now, it was widely, I think, accepted that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, to fans of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, was a very good movie. It's like, thank you for doing the movie justice, because sometimes you have this great thing, this TV show, and they came up with the movie, and you're like, what are you doing here? What's going on? Well, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, I thought it performed very well, and I believe it was very widely accepted as a great movie. to complement the TV series. And the video game, no exception. The video game's great. It plays like the other Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game that came out the year prior. And this one, very similar to that one, just more of the same. That kind of side-scrolling 2D beat 'em up, but 2D, so you're not like on a platform or anything. It's just a literal 2D beat 'em up. And it looked a little bit better and performed a little bit better. I thought it was pretty cool. King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. There are like 3 King Arthur games on the Super Nintendo, and it's hard to tell them apart sometimes. There's King Arthur's World, which is the strategy style game. There's Knights of the Round that you play as King Arthur, but then there's King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. Was this a cartoon that I'm not remembering? I don't want to do any research. Was this a cartoon or something? It probably was. This one's pretty cool. You choose your team, because you have King Arthur and then the 2 other guys. You can choose whatever 2 other guys you want. And then it plays like that kind of overhead slash your sword Zelda-ish game. Not exactly like Zelda, but just to give you an idea like how it looks when you play the game as you're walking around and everything. Why not? And it's King Arthur. That's kind of cool. Tecmo Secret of the Stars. Now we have Tecmo, the great Tecmo company, doing turn-based RPGs. Why? Because they sell so well, especially on the Super Nintendo. The box art and the label art leave a lot to be imagined. Like, there's something with it's as if like somebody was just starting a YouTube channel. That's what their thumbnails look like. There's like way too much text and not enough. Just show me what the thing is. That's kind of what I got from Tecmo Secret of the Stars. I'll just leave it with that. Wild Guns also came out. Wild Guns I liked. I didn't know the value was going to go up so high, but I liked Wild Guns because I loved Cabal. And if you ever played Cabal in the arcade or even on the NES, it plays like that. The behind the shoulder, not really an on-rail shooter because you're not really moving, but it's that behind the shoulder and you can like dodge and shoot the other guys. Like as if Operation Wolf didn't pivot left and right. It was just you have your single screen, but you can move around and shoot all the other people and stuff like that too. Wild Guns is great. And they did come out with a newer Wild Gun game for like the Switch, I think recently. And on Super Nintendo, it's great. We also had Chrono Trigger. The moment you pop it in, you get the black screen, and you have that one pendulum swing of the clock, the tick and the talk. You're like, ooh, this is going to be great. And little did you know, before you even played it, that it would soon become probably your favorite game of all time. To a few people anyway. I mean, I say every game is someone's favorite game of all time, but there's a whole lot of people who love them some Chrono Trigger. And no reason why not. It was that perfect Squaresoft, the graphics, the music, the storyline, the multiple endings. Chrono Trigger has a lot going on for itself, and there's a reason why people still talk about it today. It's a reason why people still celebrate it today, do covers of the video game songs and all that. It's Chrono Trigger. Gotta love it. We talked about how Batman Forever was #1 in the box office. Never mind how good the movie is, it was #1 in 1995. So as far as box office goes, S tier. As far as video game goes, F tier. It's terrible. I hate this game. It's a terrible game. There are some people who say, no, you gotta get into it, you gotta play it. Oh man. They've spent too much time on the visuals and the voice samples and all that for them to actually put out a good quality, fluid game. It's one of those games, because it was still during that time where they're doing like motion capture and stuff. You didn't need to do that for this one. It could have just been like, hey, it's Batman Forever like the movie, but we're gonna kind of cartoonyize it, and they should have done that. But not great. Captain Commando is a fun beat 'em up because Captain Commando you can play as a baby and a robot. That works for me. It's also a fun beat 'em up though. You should check out Captain Commando. 1994 we had Wolfenstein 3D, so it only makes sense that in this year we would get Doom. Finally, can the Super Nintendo play Doom? It can, and this was the version I played. I tried it on my friend's computer for a little bit. I was like, okay, I get it. This is pretty cool. This is a pretty fun game. And then when I heard it was coming out to Super Nintendo, I'm like, wait a minute. The system where they removed the blood from Mortal Kombat is going to have a Doom game on it? Well, fortunately, I think they left it alone to the best they could, and I thought it played really well on Super Nintendo, as far as me playing Super Nintendo games go. So Doom, great experience, love it on Super Nintendo, still a lot of fond memories playing Doom, for sure. Castlevania Dracula X. This was fun because I didn't realize that this was like a version of Dracula X for the PC Engine Duo, or the Turbo Duo, Turbo CD. But this is the Super Nintendo version. Slightly watered down, which is okay. At least we got a copy of it, and at least it came out in the United States, and it's a great game. It's excellent. I think it plays really well on Super Nintendo. It's not the Turbo CD version, but it also can't be the Turbo CD version because you can't top that CD soundtrack, which I love. And there's a little bit other things going on with it too. I'm not going to get into the details. I'm sure you can in the comments if you'd like. Love to hear about it. But it did come out, for sure. It was only a matter of time as well, with how popular Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was, for us to get a 2D fighting game. So we have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition. What I was hoping was more of a you play as the characters of the game and less the robot. Well, I wish they could do that too. But it turned out to be less about you can play as the individual characters and more about fighting as the Megazord or the Ultra Zord or the Super Zord. I'm totally butchering these names. I promise I apologize. The fun part would have been to have the characters, fight the weird monsters that happened. But it was more about like the giant robot fighting. I was hoping for more. Not that it's a terrible game. I just wish it was more like that though. But it did come out. We had Yoshi's Island. Now they called it Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, but it really just was Yoshi's Island. It was kind of its own thing. It was kind of its own story. Yeah, it controlled like a Mario game, but you played as Yoshi. That you had to protect baby Mario. The crying baby Mario sound, it was not good. But that's the point, is you have to rescue him when he pops off your back. But it's a super fun game. I actually had a lot of fun with this game. It is the best reason to play this game. So you can be tripping on the fuzzies and everything looks all weird and stuff like that. I thought that was the best thing ever. I wish that would come back in future Mario games where you have to touch, not you don't have to. I did it on purpose, trust me. I thought it was great, but I had a lot of fun with that. And just the visuals for the time too, around the time when Nintendo was like, hey, you know what, we could just do pixel graphics all day long, but then they start using clay models, and they're like, hey, you know what, why don't we make it look like colored pencil or crayon or construction paper later with other games and stuff. Fun with the graphics, why not? It's still a great game, love this game. Secret of Evermore came out, and if you loved Secret of Mana, or Secret of Mana if you're fancy, then you're gonna love Secret of Evermore. Oh boy, what a great experience. I loved the fact that Secret of Evermore, again, going back to the everything starts in a weird fantasy world, parallel universe, whatever. This game, you start in Podunk, USA. Literally says Podunk, USA. I like that because I grew up in Podunk, USA. Trust me. I can relate to this character and his dog. Maybe not the dog, because I didn't have a dog. But it gives you something you can relate with and not just be like, ooh, I'm going to be the cool guy. You play as some dude. You play as some kid in Podunk, USA. That could be anyone. It could be you. And that's what I love about Secret of Evermore. And the music's great, and the storyline's great, and everything else is great about it too. I wish it had more notoriety as a Secret of Mana or a Final Fantasy, but Secret of Evermore is a super, super great game. You ever played WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game? Now I did, but by this time that it came out on the Super Nintendo, I already had it on the PlayStation, because the PlayStation also came out in 1995. WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game, used the digitized graphics to create these characters. However, because it was on Super Nintendo, they had to remove a couple of characters, so you don't get Bam Bam Bigelow, and you don't get Yokozuna. So you only have a very, very limited roster of characters you can actually play as. The combo moves are ridiculous. This game is super over the top. I think they kind of got to the point where there's like, well, we can't really do a good wrestling game, so let's just make it a fun fighting game that has these wrestlers in it. And if you haven't looked up the endings to this game, like when you beat the game with the different wrestlers and the storylines they give you, like when you beat the game, are insane. I have no idea where they came from, but it's like, you have to look it up. I mean, even if you don't play it through, they have like YouTube stuffs on it, like it's crazy. It's so weird. But it was an interesting game anyway. Breath of Fire 2 came out near the end of the year as well. A lot like Breath of Fire 1, with a few different changes. Still great story, still great music. I think the music's great anyway. It's a whole lot of grinding in this one. Usually around this time, that's when I was like, okay, cool. RPGs are starting to go away a little bit from, because I came from the day of like NES RPGs, and even some Sega Genesis RPGs, where it's like, you have to grind. Like before you go to the next town, you have to just hang out for like 5 hours and just defeat enemies and go to the inn and heal up and defeat more enemies and defeat more enemies. And this Breath of Fire 2 felt a little bit like that for me to really enjoy it. I still prefer the first one, but Breath of Fire 2 is a wonderful, excellent game as well. It might take longer than you expect for that one. Just in time for Christmas, Donkey Kong Country 2. This is Diddy's Kong Quest. I keep wanting to call it Diddy Kong's Quest because it's his quest, but no, it's Diddy's Conquest, and it's like because Conquest, that's the play on words, that's the pun. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Well, this is fine. This is passing the torch because we had Donkey Kong Country. You play as Donkey Kong with Diddy Kong, and now this one is you play as Diddy Kong, and Donkey Kong, he's like, you know what? I'm good. I'm gonna sit this one out. you have fun with this one. It's more of the same. Love it. You ever play Revolution X? I've played this in the arcade. I also had it on a PlayStation, but they had a version on the Super Nintendo as well. Plays fine. Operation Wolf style, that on-rail shooter that, in the arcade you want to play because you have, a two-player, you have your own gun and everything like that too. This one features Aerosmith. It has an Aerosmith soundtrack. Aerosmith even pops up in this game, but you're shooting the bad guys. But your super weapon, your special weapon, CDs. You're actually chucking CDs at people, which I thought was like, okay, I guess it's a little bit on brand. The Revolution X, why not? We did have Toy Story in the movie theater, and then Toy Story for Super Nintendo actually has very good visuals. Animation's great for Super Nintendo, the visuals are great as well. It's okay of a game, but it was really cool to see. These are like really fluid animations. Like, Super Nintendo is really starting to find its stride, even though the Super Nintendo was probably about around peak era during this time. It was like, yeah, this is really good. And we also had a game called Zoop. Z-O-O-P, Zoop, a puzzle game. Man, I remember the commercial for this. I remember the music for this. The music from the commercial anyway. This game was on all the consoles. They didn't have it on NES because the NES is no more. It's, NES stopped making games in 1994. If it was 1994 and this game came out, I promise you this game would have been on that too. I'm sure there's somebody who could homebrew it and put it on there too. A decent puzzle game where you have to like zip through up, down, left, right, grab the pieces and put them somewhere else and clear out the other lines depending on what color you are from the pieces you pick up and stuff like that too. It was heavily marketed. Was it a good game? I don't know. I rented it. I had fun with it. And there's a whole lot more games that came out in 1995. We can call it good for this video.